Ever grab a coffee when you didn't really need one? Or maybe felt that pang of regret after buying something you didn't need? Like a total impulse buy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, we're diving into the neuroscience of money today. And get this, you're going to learn why your brain chemistry plays a huge role in those moments.
Yeah, it's like our brains are kind of working against us sometimes.
Totally. It's like self-sabotage almost.
Exactly. And what I find so fascinating about this book is that it goes way beyond just like typical budgeting tips or, tricks. We're talking about the actual neurochemicals that drive our behavior with money. It's like we get to peek behind the curtain of our own financial decisions.
Okay, I am so intrigued, but also a little scared to find out what my brain has been doing to mess me up financially all these years.
Don't worry, we're all in this together.
Okay, good to know. So let's start with something I've at least heard of before, dopamine. Isn't that the pleasure chemical or something?
It is.
Yeah.
And it's super tied to how we view financial rewards. Like when we think about money.
So is that why daydreaming about winning the lottery feels so good? Even though the odds are, not in our favor?
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's not just about getting the reward, though. It's the anticipation that really gets the dopamine flowing.
Oh, so that's why that lottery ticket feels so good, even if you don't win.
Exactly. And there's actually a concept called reward prediction error. Basically, a dopamine goes into overdrive when a reward is unexpected, like a surprise bonus.
Oh, yeah. Makes total sense. So like that rush you get from a surprise bonus at work versus, just getting your regular paycheck.
Exactly.
But I have a feeling this dopamine rush isn't always a good thing when it comes to like actual finances.
Yeah, you're catching on. This is where dopamine becomes a double-edged sword. That anticipation can lead us down the path of risky investments or, spending sprees, where the thrill of that potential reward outweighs any rational assessment.
Okay, that is so true. It's like my brain is telling me, you deserve this, it's fine. But my bank account is like, nope, nope.
Uh-huh, exactly. So the key is to learn how to control those dopamine urges. It's possible.
Okay, so how do we avoid falling into those dopamine traps?
So successful investors, they've actually learned to harness their dopamine response in a positive way. Instead of chasing those quick hits of dopamine, they focus on the long-term rewards and build systems that promote, consistent and disciplined investing.
So it's like they're training their brains to find more satisfaction and steady growth rather than risky gambles.
That's a great way to put it.
Cool. I like that. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit. What about serotonin? I know that's linked to happiness, but how does that play into our financial lives?
So serotonin is often called the stability chemical, and it plays a key role in our financial well-being. As your financial situation improves, like you get a raise or a promotion, your serotonin levels often rise. That makes you feel more secure, more content.
So more money, more serotonin, more happiness. Is that the basic equation?
Well, I wish it were that simple. While money does contribute to happiness, studies have shown that it only goes up to a point. There's this thing called the wealth-happiness paradox. After a certain income level, additional wealth doesn't actually increase your happiness that much.
Interesting. So it's not just about how much we make, it's also how we manage our emotions and priorities as our financial situation changes.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
All right, well, I think we need to talk about the not-so-fun side of brain chemistry now. What about stress and how it affects our finances?
Ah, yes. Cortisol, the infamous stress hormone.
I was afraid you were going to say that one.
When we experience financial stress, like market volatility or personal challenges, our cortisol levels go through the roof.
And that can't be good.
Not at all. And it can seriously impact our decision-making.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely relate to that. When I'm stressed about money, sometimes I make impulse purchases or just avoid dealing with my finances completely. It's like my brain just shuts down.
That's a very common response, actually. Cortisol triggers our fight or flight response.
Yeah.
Helpful in an actual dangerous situation, but not so much when it comes to managing money.
So in those moments, we're not exactly making the best choices, are we?
Right. When cortisol takes over, we're more impulsive, more risk-averse.
Yeah.
And probably going to make decisions we regret later on.
So basically, when cortisol takes over, our financial smarts fly out the window.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And chronic financial stress, that's where it can get really damaging. It leads to a cycle of poor choices, which just makes the stress and anxiety even worse.
That's a vicious cycle.
Okay, so
Less stress, better choices. Got it. But that's definitely easier said than done. What are some practical ways we can actually manage that cortisol monster?
well, there's some effective techniques for managing financial stress, and that's what we'll dive into after the break. Mindfulness practices are really helpful.
Okay, cool. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
We're back and ready to learn about how to manage that financial stress.
All right, so as I was saying, mindfulness practices exercise
Yeah.
and getting enough sleep. All of these can actually help regulate those cortisol levels, and they can really improve your ability to make clear-headed decisions about your finances.
Okay, so those are good starting points. But before we move on, I'm curious about something else. We've talked about dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol. What about oxytocin? I usually think of that as like the love and bonding chemical, not really related to finances. Does it actually play a role here?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And you might be surprised how deeply oxytocin is intertwined with our financial lives. Think about it, trust is essential in any financial system. We need to trust banks, financial advisors, even the entire economic system as a whole. And oxytocin, the trust molecule, plays a key role in building that trust.
So basically, oxytocin makes us more likely to believe in the system and participate in it.
Exactly. Studies have shown that higher levels of oxytocin are linked to increased trust in financial institutions and advisors.
Interesting. So is that true on a larger scale too? Like, do societies with more trust have stronger economies?
That's a great question. And yes, societies with higher levels of overall trust tend to have stronger economies. It's fascinating.
Wow, I never realized that trust was so fundamental to a healthy economy. So building trust is important not just for our personal finances, but for society as a whole.
It really is. And speaking of trust, let's move on to another interesting chemical that plays a big role in our financial decisions: testosterone.
Okay. Testosterone. Now, I'm really intrigued. I know it's associated with competition and risk-taking. So does that mean people with higher testosterone levels are more likely to make, like, risky financial moves?
You're on the right track. Studies have actually found a link between testosterone levels and risk appetite, especially when it comes to financial decisions.
Hmm.
For example, traders with higher morning testosterone levels have been shown to make more money on average, but they also tend to take bigger risks.
So it's that classic high-risk, high-reward scenario. But doesn't that also mean they're more susceptible to big losses, too?
Exactly. And this is where balance is so important. Having too little testosterone can lead to missed opportunities, while having too much can lead to reckless decisions. It's all about finding that sweet spot.
So is that why there's this idea that men are bigger risk takers than women because of those different testosterone levels?
That's a common belief.
Yeah.
And while there are average differences in testosterone levels between men and women, it's important to remember that individual differences are way more important than those averages.
So we can't make assumptions based on gender. It really depends on the person.
Exactly. Everyone's different.
Okay, so we've covered dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, oxytocin, and testosterone. Is there one more brain chemical we need to discuss before wrapping up this part of our deep dive?
Yes, there's one more key player, and that's norepinephrine, also known as the alertness chemical. It plays a huge role in our ability to stay focused, process information, and make quick decisions, especially in fast-paced environments, like financial markets.
So norepinephrine is what helps us stay on top of market trends and make those split-second trading decisions?
Precisely. But just like with the other neurochemicals, balance is super important. Too little norepinephrine, and you might miss important information or opportunities. Too much, and you could become overwhelmed, anxious, and prone to overreacting to every little market fluctuation.
So it's like that fine line between staying informed and getting totally consumed by the financial news cycle, which can be tough these days.
For sure. And that's one of the big challenges of navigating the financial world. We're constantly bombarded with information.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to filter out the noise and make rational decisions.
It's like information overload. This has been so eye-opening so far. We've learned how these 6 key neurochemicals can either help or hurt our financial success. But how do we actually use all this knowledge to make smarter money choices? How do we train our brains?
That's a great question. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll get into some practical strategies for managing these neurochemicals and optimizing your brain for financial well-being.
Perfect. I'm ready to start training my brain. We'll be back after a quick break.
All right, so we're back. And we just explored how, like, all these chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, oxytocin, testosterone, and norepinephrine play a part in, like, our money decisions.
Yeah.
I'm ready to move from, like, understanding this stuff to actually doing something about it. How do we train our brains to make smarter choices with money?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? It's like, we know the players now, we need the game plan.
Exactly.
One of the most powerful tools we have is, you might not expect this one, mindfulness and meditation.
Okay, I've heard a lot about mindfulness in general, but how does that actually help with, like, money decisions? Isn't that more about being present and stuff?
Right, and that's exactly why it's so helpful for, like, finances. When we're mindful, we're more aware of our thoughts and emotions, but without judging them.
Okay.
So, like, imagine you're about to make a totally impulsive purchase. Mindfulness can help you pause, recognize that urge, and then make a more rational choice.
What?
So instead of just giving in to that I need it now feeling, I can actually step back and ask, do I really need this, or am I just stressed or bored?
Exactly. You're creating a space between that impulse and the action. And studies have shown that mindfulness can reduce cortisol levels. You know that stress hormone we talked about?
Oh, right.
Less cortisol, less likely to make those like rash decisions.
Exactly.
Okay, so mindfulness helps us stay calm even when like the market's going crazy or, life is just throwing financial curveballs.
Exactly. And here's another benefit. Mindfulness can actually increase activity in your prefrontal cortex. That's the part of your brain that's responsible for planning, decision-making, impulse control.
So it's like we're strengthening the CEO of our brain.
I like that analogy. The CEO of your brain, making smarter financial calls.
I am sold. What else can we do to train our brains?
Another surprising brain hack is getting enough sleep.
Okay, I know sleep is important in general, but how does that impact my finances? Okay, so think back to dopamine, that reward-seeking chemical. When we don't get enough sleep, we experience something called dopamine dysregulation. Basically, our brain's reward system gets out of whack.
So we crave more and more dopamine just to feel good.
Right, which can lead to, chasing those dopamine hits through risky investments or impulse spending.
Or maybe just another cup of coffee.
Exactly. And all of that can really hurt your financial well-being.
So a good night's sleep can help us resist those dopamine traps. It's like hitting reset on my reward system.
Exactly. And sleep also helps reduce cortisol and inflammation, which can impair our judgment and sometimes lead to more emotional spending.
Okay, I am convinced I'm prioritizing sleep from now on. What about exercise? I know it's good for our bodies, but what about our wallets?
Exercise is like a miracle drug for your brain. It boosts those feel-good chemicals like endorphins and dopamine, which increases motivation, improves mood.
So I'll feel more energized and ready to tackle those financial goals.
Exactly. Plus, remember cortisol. Exercise helps regulate that too. So less stress, better ability to think clearly under pressure.
So it's like a workout for our brain and body.
It is.
I like it. Okay, so we've got mindfulness, sleep, exercise. What about food? Does what we eat impact our finances too?
Absolutely. Just like we fuel our bodies with healthy food, we need to nourish our brains for optimal financial performance. One key nutrient is omega-3 fatty acids.
I know omega-3s are good for my heart, but what do they have to do with money?
They've been shown to support serotonin function, which, remember, promotes patient stability, less impulsive behavior.
So all the things I need to make good financial decisions.
Right. And it's not a magic bullet,
Uh-huh.
but a diet rich in omega-3s can support a healthy neurochemical balance.
Got it. What else should we be eating?
Protein is another important one. Protein provides tyrosine, which is a precursor to dopamine. That motivation and reward chemical, adequate protein, helps make sure we have enough dopamine to fuel our drive and keep us focused on our goals.
Okay, so a balanced breakfast with some protein can set me up for a more productive and financially savvy day. What about things to avoid?
Sugary processed foods can lead to those blood sugar crashes, which trigger cortisol.
Ugh. So even though that donut might make me feel good in the moment, it's actually going to sabotage my financial well-being later on.
Exactly. It's all about those balanced, nutritious meals. They help you stay calm, focused, and financially sharp.
Okay, so mindfulness, sleep, exercise, nutrition. It's all about creating a healthy foundation for our minds and bodies, which then leads to better choices overall.
You got it. It's all connected. And speaking of connections, there's one more powerful tool: social connection.
Okay, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of social connection as being that important for my finances. How do my relationships impact my money?
Strong, supportive relationships act as a buffer against financial stress. When you spend time with loved ones, friends, family, your community, that triggers the release of oxytocin, which can counteract the negative effects of cortisol.
So having a good support system can help me be more resilient when I'm going through financial challenges.
Absolutely. And those social connections often come with accountability. Sharing your goals with someone you trust can help you stay on track.
It's like having a financial cheerleading squad.
Exactly. And don't forget networking. Connecting with others in your field or people who share your financial interests can open up opportunities, provide insights.
So nurturing our relationships can actually boost our financial well-being in multiple ways. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. It can feel overwhelming, though.
You're right. It's a lot to take in. But here's the thing. Creating a financially savvy brain isn't about perfection. It's not about meditating for hours a day or becoming a marathon runner.
So I don't need to completely overhaul my life?
Nope, it's about making small, sustainable changes that work for you and your goals. Start with one or two things and build from there.
I like that. Progress over perfection.
Exactly.
Okay, so we're back, and if you're just joining us, we've been talking about how our brain chemistry can totally mess with our money decisions. But the good news is we can actually train our brains to make smarter choices.
Exactly. We've been talking about all these amazing tools like mindfulness, sleep exercise, nutrition, social connection. It's all about optimizing our money mindset.
Right. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritty. Like, how do we actually apply this stuff to real-life money decisions?
Yeah, that's the real challenge, isn't it? It's one thing to understand the neuroscience, but how do we actually use it in those moments when we're tempted to make an impulse buy or, invest in something risky?
Okay, let's say someone gives you a hot stock tip, or there's a new cryptocurrency that everyone's talking about. You don't want to miss out. What's happening in our brains at that moment? And how do we avoid making a decision we'll regret later?
Well, first off, recognize that dopamine is probably surging. That anticipation of potential rewards,
Yeah.
especially when it's something new and exciting, that can totally cloud our judgment.
Yeah, it's like that little dopamine gremlin on your shoulder whispering, do it, you'll be rich. But we know better.
Right. So how do you counter that impulsive urge? Remember those dopamine management techniques we talked about?
Like taking a step back.
Exactly. Don't make any decisions when you're in the heat of the moment. Implement a waiting period. Even if it's just for a few hours or a day, give yourself time to cool off, do your research, and evaluate the opportunity rationally.
So resist that FOMO, that fear of missing out. It's
Huh?
hard, but we got to pause and think things through.
Right. And it might be helpful to talk to like a financial advisor, someone who can give you an objective perspective, help you see the bigger picture.
And while we're doing our research, we should also pay attention to our stress levels. If you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed, that cortisol spike could be pushing you toward a hasty decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you notice that you're getting stressed, step away from the computer, take a walk, do some deep breathing, listen to some music, let that cortisol subside before making any big money moves.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about when we're dealing with financial stress? Like unexpected expenses pop up or, you're worried about retirement. How do we stop those negative emotions from leading to bad financial choices?
When cortisol is high, we often crave those quick dopamine hits, just to feel better, even if they're not in our best interest long term. And avoidance, while tempting, only makes the problem worse down the road.
Right. It's like those retail therapy sprees or ignoring credit card statements. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not a good long-term solution.
Not at all. So how do we break that cycle? First, acknowledge your stress triggers. What financial situations really send your cortisol levels through the roof? Once you're aware of them, you can start to develop coping mechanisms.
So like, if I know that checking my investment portfolio during a market downturn stresses me out, maybe I should check it less often.
Exactly. Or if you tend to overspend when you're stressed,
Yeah.
maybe avoid the mall or online shopping.
Okay, so it's all about creating healthy boundaries and finding different ways to cope with those stressful moments.
Exactly. And don't forget all those stress reduction techniques we talked about earlier. Mindfulness exercise, spending time with people you care about. Those can all help regulate cortisol and bring you back to a calmer, more rational state of mind.
Okay. And what about professional support? Is it ever a good idea to talk to a financial therapist?
Absolutely. Sometimes having that outside perspective can be really helpful. They can help you come up with personalized strategies for dealing with financial challenges.
So it's like having a personal trainer for your finances.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about dopamine and cortisol. What about oxytocin, that trust molecule? Let's say you're meeting with a financial advisor for the first time. How do you know if you can trust them?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, your intuition can be a guide. But remember, oxytocin can sometimes make us more susceptible to persuasion, so it's important to do your due diligence.
Okay, so don't just hand over all your money because someone seems nice and has a fancy office.
Right. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to really dig into their experience, their qualifications, their approach. Look for red flags, like pressure tactics, unrealistic promises, or if they're not being transparent.
And trust your gut. If something feels off, walk away.
Exactly. Okay, and last but not least, let's talk about testosterone and risk tolerance. Imagine there's an investment opportunity that seems amazing. Everyone's making money, but it's also super risky. How do you decide if it's right for you?
This is where FOMO really comes into play, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And testosterone can really amplify that risk-taking impulse. It's all about finding that balance between risk and reward. Too much risk aversion and you might miss out on some great opportunities. But too much risk, and you could lose everything.
So how do we find that balance?
First, assess your own personal risk tolerance. What level of risk are you actually comfortable with? What would keep you up at night? Then consider your financial goals, your time horizon, and your overall financial situation.
So if you're close to retirement, you're probably not going to gamble on a high-risk venture. But if you're younger, you have more time to recover from potential losses.
Exactly. And don't forget to diversify your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread your risk to create a more stable portfolio.
Wow, this has been an incredible journey into the world of neurofinance. It's so fascinating how much our brain chemistry affects our financial decisions.
It is. And the best part is, we can actually learn to control these forces. By using the strategies we've talked about, mindfulness, sleep, exercise, nutrition, social connection, and just being more aware of how our brains work, we can create a more balanced and fulfilling financial life.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you learned some valuable insights, and most importantly, that you can actually train your brain to make smarter choices with your money. Remember, start small, be consistent, and enjoy the journey to financial well-being.